Hi everybody, my name is Crystal. I'm just gonna give a little bit of information about myself. Growing up, I grew up in East Dallas. I grew up with my mom and my stepdad. I didn't have my dad in my life. I didn't end up meeting him till the age of 17.
Different stories, one savior. Every woman has a place here.
I grew up in an environment that was very negative. I didn't have a good relationship with my mom. I am the oldest of 5 children. For some reason, me and my mom, really didn't get along. Me growing up, I could remember a lot of negativity, a lot of negative words being said to me, things like that. Also, my stepdad had us very isolated from our family. My mom and us were not allowed to see, like, my grandmother and my aunts. So we were always it was just us. Or sometimes he would take us, to see his family, but we weren't allowed to see our family. I remember growing up very lonely at times because, like, I didn't really get along with my mom, and my brothers and sisters were a lot smaller, and I didn't, have my cousins around or anything. So I remember growing up lonely a lot, and I remember always being, like, in the closet by myself, writing. I used to write a lot of poetry, write my feelings, how I felt, write letters that I never presented to anybody, but just it was something that I did, I guess, to get everything out that I had in me. I don't know how that came about. Nobody showed me those things, but it was just something that I guess now looking back on it, I never really thought about it, but I'm pretty sure that's what helped me, get through a lot of the tough times that I went through. I was not raised in a Christian home. We didn't go to church. That I can remember, I don't remember ever being taught how to pray or saw my mother pray or read her Bible, nothing like that. I don't even know if she owned a Bible, honestly. There's a lot of things that I don't remember, but it doesn't stick out to me. So I wasn't raised in a Christian home. I wasn't raised, they were supposedly Catholic, but even then they didn't go to church or anything like that. I did go through a lot of difficulty as a child because, again, negativity, the negative talk. I was always told that I was never going to be anybody, that I was good for nothing, that I was lazy, it was just a lot of negative words that were told to me. So I grew up with a lot of, I guess, emotional problems. I remember having thoughts of suicide. Oh, I was young. I was maybe 7 when I would think of things like that. Also because I was molested at a very young age. I think maybe about 5 or 6. It started around that age and continued on till about 14 or so. I had a lot of anger as well and depression. I used to cry a lot. I was always isolating myself from the rest of the family. I always felt like, I used to always say maybe I was adopted or because I felt like I didn't fit in. I honestly felt like I wasn't part of the family. I didn't feel like I fit in with anybody. I felt like I wasn't wanted. I was just a burden. Those are all the feelings that I felt growing up. I can say that I've forgiven that person, and it's still a work in progress, but for the most part, It is somebody that I still see from time to time in my life. So I'm able to be cordial with the person, but there's still some things that I'm not able to do. But that and the negative words, I guess, was what really stemmed a lot of my issues, insecurities, because I grew up having really low self-esteem. But in school, I excelled. I was very good in school. I loved school so much. I guess you could say that I was a little nerd. But I would get involved in so many activities in school. In elementary school, I was part of a program that is for really intelligent kids. So you would go to competitions and things like that. I was in the newspaper, I was secretary, and I would just get involved in all kinds of things. Middle school, I was in the pep squad. I started playing softball, band, choir. I was in pretty much everything, you name it, I was in it. And I had a lot of friends. I've always been very personable. I've always been a person that I can make friends very easily. Just strangers have always been attracted to me to just come and tell me their life story. And they were always just say, there's something about you, but I feel like I can open up to you. I feel like I could trust you. So it's always been like that my whole life. A lot of people didn't know that I was going through the things that I was going through at home because I really didn't talk about it with my friends. At school, I was this happy-go-lucky person. I was a clown. I would make people laugh. And so I remember a couple of times having friends later in life and telling them a little bit about my story. And they're like, man, I didn't even know you were going through all of that. It was something that I hid very well. So that I feel like instead of running to drugs or other things that most people do at a very young age, I think I did the opposite and was like just really focused on doing good, because I was told that I was never gonna graduate high school, that I was gonna drop out of school. So that was part of the reason, I guess, too. I wanted to show everybody that I was able to. And I really wanted to finish school. I really loved school. A lot of people say, I didn't like school. You know, school was boring to me. No, but I loved it. I loved being there. I started kind of knowing a little bit about God at a very young age, because I remember going to spend the night at cousin's house, like during the summer or breaks or stuff like that. My mom was really close. It was her cousin, and I was really close to her kids. So they were like faraway cousins. So I would spend the night. At that time, their parents, or her mom, actually, not the dad, but the mom was a Christian. So when I'd spend the night with them, they'd take me to church. So I think that's where I started, knowing a little bit about it. And I was young. Maybe 7, 8 or so. I'm not quite sure about the age, but I know I was young. And I started reading the Bible at a young age. At that time, they gave me a Bible. I do remember distinctly somebody praying for me and laying hands over me. And I will never forget that. But this was a church, because we went to 2 different churches. But this was a church in Oak Cliff, and the pastor was named Benjamin Paredes. And I still remember because they laid their hands on me and spoke things like, about breaking generational curses, and, that God was going to save me and things like that, things that at the time I didn't understand. But looking back, like I felt like God chose me from the middle of nowhere, because, most people that I know have the testimony where their grandmother was a Christian and their grandmother, was praying for them, for their salvation, or their mother or their father, or, their parents were were pastors or things like that. Most people that I know in the church have that testimony, but I didn't have either of that, and I didn't have anybody praying for me, and so I just felt like God just picked me out of the middle of nowhere, you know, and I'm grateful for that. I'm very grateful for that. I didn't know a lot, and I didn't really have anybody to like teach me or follow up. So throughout the years, I knew that I was seeking for something, but I didn't know what I was seeking for. There was just something that, you know, in the back of my head that I felt like I needed to find, you know, find that thing. And so throughout the years, as I started like reading more and more of the Bible, I started to realize that a lot of the things that we were taught as Catholics wasn't even in the Bible. So I started to like question a lot of things and be like, okay, so like, what is it? Where do I need to go, or what do I need to do? So I started like going to different churches. I remember going to Baptist church. I remember going to Jehovah's Witness. I remember going to like, I think the Seventh-day Adventist or something like that. I remember going to all types, non-denominational. But the one that I kind of stuck with the most was the Baptist, because they used to teach us a lot of the Bible, which there was some things that they would leave out, but for the most part, it did teach me a lot. So I remember maybe about the age of 14 or 15, I think, I started going to a Baptist church because they would come and knock on the door and pick us up on a bus. So because I was the oldest of my brothers and sisters, I would take them with me. So my mom never went, my stepdad never went, but I was going and I would take my brothers and sisters with me. And that's where I got baptized at the age of 16. Throughout my life, I was still struggling, but I was going to church. I started working at the age of 14, so I was still going to school. I was working. I really didn't want to be home that much, so I guess that's why I would do all these activities. I played basketball, softball, sometimes they had, athletics had to where you could volunteer at the games. So on our off season and we weren't playing and practicing, I would go and do that. So I was always doing something. I was always busy. But I think that's what helped me to get away from it. But the situation at home I felt like was getting worse and worse. I would want to do good things, and for some reason my mom never wanted to support me in any of it. I would play sports, and sometimes she would take me, and sometimes she would get mad and she's like, I'm not gonna take you anymore. Figure out a way how to go. And I'd be like, that's fine, I'll go walking, I don't care. But I would end up calling my coach and somebody would pick me up and things like that. But it was to the point where I felt like anything that I would do, my mom didn't want to support me. So I was like, I don't understand, because I'm not doing anything bad. I'm not asking her to support a bad habit. So there was a time when I was younger that I rebelled. It was my freshman year in high school, and I would skip a lot of school, and I was doing things. I still wasn't doing drugs, but I was doing other things that I shouldn't do. I wasn't allowed to have a boyfriend, but at that age, girls always, you don't let them have a boyfriend, all girls pretty much sneak around and lie. So it was things that, it was normal things. It wasn't things that was drugs or gang related or anything like that, right? Which I grew up in a neighborhood that was primarily gangs, so I did have friends that were gang members, but I really didn't get into that until later on in life. I did end up getting somewhat into it later on in life, but not at that time. So to make it a little bit shorter, I ended up running away from home at 17. But I didn't run away with a guy, or I didn't run away with friends. I actually went to move in with my grandma. So I went to, we weren't allowed to see her, talk to her, but I would still talk to her escondidas from my stepdad. But my grandma knew the situation that I was going through, and I did tell her the truth of things that I was going through. And she told me, she was like, well, aquí están las puertas abiertas. The only issue that with my grandma was she was by herself, so she was always working, and I really didn't have anybody there to really look after me, which I felt like I didn't need it because I was so involved in work and school that I really didn't need it. Work, school, and sports. But when I did go move in with my mom, with my grandma, I was still going to school. I was still going to work. Like, I had to walk pretty long ways to go to school. Like, I would wake up myself, go to school, and go to work. And there was complaints because, where my grandma lived is a little area where a lot of people go walking by. So I'd be outside sometimes and people would recognize me. And so apparently they would make a big deal because apparently I shouldn't be having a boyfriend, or they didn't want anybody at my grandma's house. But I didn't bring anybody in the house. Like, we would be talking outside of the fence, Like, people would pass by and see me, oh, you're over here, you stay over here, I didn't know, and, things like that, right? And they would come visit me, but they'd be on the outside of the fence. So, of course, which is understandable, now at me having kids, I can understand that it would look bad, right? So my aunt was living in the same apartment complex, and my aunt basically told me that my grandma didn't have time to be taking care of me and things like that, and that I had to make a choice between working and playing sports, and that they were giving me an ultimatum. So what was told to me was that I had to make a choice of whether I had to work or play sports. And it wasn't going to be the sports because it had to be working because my grandmother wasn't going to support me, or she didn't have enough money to support me, which I'm not sure why, because I've always was able to do all of it without any problems. Like, I was always able to juggle everything: work, sports, school, and I made very good grades in school. Like, I already had college credit. And so I don't know why they made me do that, but when they took my sports away, it's like my sports was everything. And basically that was what was keeping my mind occupied, So when they took that away, that's when I started going down the wrong path, because I felt like no matter how hard I tried, I didn't have not even one person supporting me. And I tried so hard to do good and to do the right thing. And no matter how hard I tried, like, I didn't have not even one person to even help me, or and it's not that I really even needed the help. Like, I was doing it fine, but it was like I felt at that time everybody was against me, So I got to the point where I was like, okay, they want to see me bad, then I'm going to do bad. And that's when I started, doing things, even more things. I started, smoking weed. I started hanging out more with the gang members and, I stopped going to school. I stopped working. I just stopped everything, and I started down a bad path. I started breaking into houses, breaking into cars, hanging out with gang members. I never got initiated into the gang, but I was always hanging around with them. I was always hanging around with them. I didn't drink. I didn't like to drink, but I did smoke weed and things like that. And I was always helping them do some type of lick here, there, everywhere. But eventually, you know, it ended up catching up to me, and I ended up getting locked up for 3 months. And when I got out with a pending felony case that I had to report, and it actually wasn't even here in Dallas. I went with a boyfriend of mine to the Rio Grande Valley, and we got caught up over there. So when I got out of jail, because he got locked up, and his parents didn't want me in his house, so I didn't have anywhere to go. I was 17, and it was adult jail. At that city, 17 was considered an adult. And I was scared out of my mind. Like, it was my first time ever, and it wasn't juvie, it was adult jail. And, you know, I had heard so many horror stories that when I was freaking out. I was freaking out, but the funny thing is, I feel like even throughout the things that I did, God always had a hand of protection over me, somewhat, right? Because in the time that I was doing bad things, sometimes I didn't have anywhere to stay. I remember sometimes staying in the streets or sleeping in a van or like walking around looking, and strangers would pick me up and give me a place to stay, even sometimes men. And thankfully, I've always had that intuition to feel like if it's a bad person or a good person. So I wouldn't go when I had a bad feeling. But when I had a good feeling, I would go. And thankfully, nothing ever happened to me. But when I got out of jail, same thing. I didn't have anywhere to go. And I remember staying on a banquito of like a Walgreens or a CVS or something. And, you know, somebody came to help me. He's like, I can't give you a place to stay, but if you need like to shower and sleep for a little bit and some food, like I can give you a place for a few hours. And, you know, he did. I ended up having to contact my probation officer and telling him like, hey, I don't know anybody over here. I'm staying in the streets. I need to go back home. Because I was on probation there, like I wasn't allowed to leave the city. So the probation officer like pulled some strings or whatever, and they ended up getting me a Greyhound ticket back home. So I was able to go back home. And then I would have to like write a letter once a month to like, basically that's how I had to report to them. Because I still had that one case pending. Well, I ended up going back to jail a couple years later because I had 2 years of probation, and the probation officer never told me. And then I guess because the address or I don't know how that even went, because I'm guessing they should have had my current address, but maybe the probation officer wasn't doing his job, because he didn't even tell me that I had court going, coming up or whatever, and I ended up missing the court for that. So then there was a warrant for my arrest for that case, and I ended up going to jail again for the second time for that. But the first time I went to jail, I was already like, this is not the life that I want. Like, this is not for me. Like, I need to make changes in my life, because jail is not for me. I don't like it. No, thank you. And even though, like, I was very well taken care of, because, let me backtrack a little bit, because I keep kind of going back and forth. So when I went to jail the first time, we were actually in a high-speed chase, and because we had broken into That time I didn't do anything. I was just like, I guess, the lookout. But we had done several, I'm guessing maybe 5 or 6 cars that they broke into, took the systems and whatever else that they could find inside the trucks. And I guess somebody saw us and reported us. And I always used to have these feelings that something was going to happen. And I was telling them, hey, you know what? We need to go because I have a bad feeling. And they wouldn't listen to me. So there they go, still continuing. And then the cop came, and I guess he already had the description of the truck that we were in. And he pulled up behind us. And the guy that was driving just took off, and we were in a high-speed chase. So over there in the valley, the cities are really close to each other. So I think, passed 4 or 5 cities. And we were in a high-speed chase, and he ended up driving into a field, and we all just jumped off, and everybody ran their own way. So when I ended up going to jail, I was freaking out. I was so scared what was going to happen. But unbeknownst to me, by the time I ended up getting there, booked, and it was already nighttime. And by the time I ended up going into population, the news had already passed. And lo and behold, I was all over the news. And I didn't know. And so as soon as I got into the tank, everybody was like, oh, that's the girl that just passed on the news. And they were all in awe of me. So as soon as I got in, they started asking me questions and what happened. And so I made friends right away. And I was the youngest one out of everybody. So it was to the point where they took very good care of me. They really took me in under their wing. I think I only had one time my mom sent me money, and one time my boyfriend's mom visited me and sent me money, once or twice. But other than that, I didn't have anybody sending me money or letters or anything like that. So people would see that, and they would give me some of their commissary or their help or whatever. There was one instance where this girl wanted to fight me, and pretty much everybody took my side. So they nicknamed me Baby because I was the youngest one in there. And so they were like, nobody messes with Baby. It was not funny because I was in not a good place. But I'm just giving the example because I felt like God really protected me in there. God really took care of me. So that was my young part of me. And I think from there, that's where I got more into seeking God more. I don't know, maybe we'll have to make a part 2 because there is still a long story. But I really didn't get into God a little bit until more later in life, because I met the father of my kids at the age of 18. At that point, I was really just working. I wasn't doing none of the bad things that I was doing anymore. The only other thing I would do was smoke weed, but other than that, like stealing, breaking into stuff, fue mi santo remedio. The jail fue mi santo remedio. I was like, no, this is not the life for me. So I met, my kid's dad. He was a charmer, but, then he showed his true colors. And maybe about 3 months into our relationship, I got pregnant with my first child. And from there, it just kind of went downhill. I thought he was a very responsible person because I would see how he would act with his nieces and nephews, and I was like, oh, he's a good person, blah, 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 whatever. No, he totally tricked me. And it was an abusive relationship. It was, he used to beat me up. He used to, again, the same words, you're nothing, you're trash, you're this. And I took it, and which is something that I know a lot of us as women, we take it because, we are having children with them, and, we want to keep our family together and things like that. But I was with him for like 6 years, and everything that I went through turned me into somebody that I didn't like. You know, I told you I was always like the happy-go-lucky person no matter what I was going through. Well, with him, it ended up changing me. Like, it ended up changing me to, like, something dark. Like, I wasn't happy anymore. I was depressed, and I was angry. Like, I was becoming a person very amargada. And I didn't like the person who I was becoming. So I think after 3 kids and, you know, being in that abusive relationship, and, you know, he was the type of man that I was the one financially responsible. He was always going out, spending all his money, wouldn't come home for days. I was the one always working and taking care of everything. And it took a toll on me. He didn't even care about the kids. Like when he was there and he was with them, yes. But once he was out there doing his things, like, he didn't care. He didn't care that we were hungry or that we needed this or we needed that. I remember one time specifically, my daughter was little and I was pregnant for my youngest son, and we had no food in the house and I wasn't working. And I cried to him and I was like, what are we gonna do? Like, we have no food, like, you know. And he didn't say nothing. He just looked at me and he left. So I assumed he was gonna go out to do something. Well, he didn't come back for days. You know, he just went out and did his thing, his partying or whatever, and left us, you know, to struggle. But I always, throughout my whole life, like, I always saw God's hand. And I remember the next door neighbor giving us some food and it was like right on time. And, you know, God never left us. And he was always there. And even though I didn't understand and I really wasn't seeking him at the time, I would pray, I would still read my Bible, I would go to church from time to time, but I didn't have that relationship with him yet. It wasn't until after I left him and met the next partner that I had, and I was with him for 7 years. And it was the same thing. Like, well, not fully the same thing. He was more financially responsible. He would help me a lot. I was maybe like 23, 24. And he was more financially responsible. You know, he would help me financially, but it was the same thing that, like, he would go out, wouldn't come home. He was abusive as well. So at that point in my life, that's when I started seeking God, like, to the fullest. And I was like, I don't know what it is. Like, no matter how hard I try, like, everything just, like, nothing in my life was good, you know? And the only thing that was good for me were my kids. That was mi motor, you know, the reason of that I didn't kill myself, because I still struggled with the suicidal thoughts. Like, I was even cutting myself. I still have scars, like small scars on my arms where I would cut myself. I remember grabbing a belt one time and squeezing, but the thoughts of my children came to my mind, you know, so I would stop. But I was going crazy. Like, I remember one time even banging my head on the wall. Like, that's how crazy I was going. I feel like if I wouldn't have met God, I would have been like in the crazy house or not here at all. And that was when I started seeking God. I started having a relationship with him. And I remember reading in the Bible, because remember I told you I used to go to a Baptist church. But in the Bible, it mentioned, like, the Holy Spirit and the fruits of the Holy Spirit, and how Jesus used to lay hands on people and people would be healed, and, you know, the speaking in tongues. None of that was really taught in Baptist church. Like, it was spoken about, but it was like spoken as if it was something in the past. Like, they didn't teach, like, this is something that you could do now. And I remember specifically reading the passage where Jesus says, and you shall do this in my name. You will, cast out demons and lay hands over people and they will be healed. And I was like, where are your people that do this, Lord? Like, where is this at? Where's the church that practices this, right? And I asked God, I was like, Lord, if this is real, show me. And that's when he sent me to a certain church, and I started going to this church, and this is where I saw all of that. And that's where my journey began with Christ. Like, I had a full relationship with him. I got baptized in the Holy Spirit, and from then on, like, my life started changing tremendously. Now, it was a war at home because the person that I was with wasn't on board. So it was a war between me and him. There's a story that I want to share that I felt like this was the turning point in my life. A prophet one day spoke to me. This prophet didn't know me. And at that, we weren't even face to face. Like, it was over the phone. Somebody, a pastor that I had, was talking to them, and for some reason was led, by the Holy Spirit to pass me the phone and to give it to me. And this prophet spoke things that, he had never met me. He didn't know anything about me. But the one thing that stuck to me, and I will remember for the rest of my life, is that he spoke about how there was a generational curse in my life where physical abuse, And I was like, yeah, it happened to my mom, it happened to my grandma, it happened to my aunts. Now it's happening to me. Like, I don't understand, like, why, I left my kid's dad, partially for that reason, and now I'm going through it again, And he spoke a word of me. He said, from this moment on, that's going to be broken over your life, and you're never gonna experience that ever again. And I physically saw it with my eyes, because from that moment forward, I was still with this person, but from that day forward, he was no longer able to lay his hand on me. Like, I physically saw it, because one time he was mad at me and he lunged at me and he went like this, but I feel like there was a force between him and me that wouldn't let him go. But I could see his fist. I could see where he was trying to get at me, but there was like, I saw it with my eyes, where he could no longer move from there to there. And from there on, ever since that day, I've never has a guy laid his hand on me ever again. So right there is where I experienced the power of God. Because there's one thing for you to know of God and for you to have a relationship with God. But when you start to experience the power of God, man, that's where transformation begins. And I'm telling you that my whole life transformed. Like, I wouldn't be the woman who I am today if it wasn't for the power of God. Because there's so many people in life that know of God, they go to church, they were raised in church, but they never get to experience that power of God, the realness of Him, because they don't really have a real relationship with Him. And that's what's the most important. Now, I have more stories to tell, but I'm gonna end it here and just say that get to really know Him, because I was transformed by His power, by His mercy, by His love, beyond anything, His love, because He loved me when I couldn't even love myself. And we put up with these things because we don't even love ourselves. So how are we going to receive love from somebody when we can't even love ourselves? So when we experience the love of God, God takes that and transforms us. He transforms us and makes us realize that we deserve better. And that's the only thing that I have, the advice that I have for other women going through the same thing, that I know many of you are going through some of the similar situations that I went through and feel like this is never going to end. I always used to tell myself, I don't even want to be here anymore. What's the point of living? Like, there's no purpose for me. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me, but God does. God does. And now he transformed me into a person. I'm a business owner now. Never thought that I was going to do half of the things that I'm doing. I have a farm that I always wanted. Everything that I desired, God is giving me now. It took a process. It was a process, but I'm seeing now the promises of God. And I guarantee you, if you know him, you will not want to go back.